If you can understand this one simple framework for self-managing pain, the speed at which you bounce back from gym-related aches and pains is going to increase massively. Just over a week ago, I was training a lot more than I usually would, and this resulted in a very stiff and painful lower back, where I was walking sideways and struggling to put on my shoes. So in this video, I'm going to teach you everything I did to go from barely being able to get out of bed to being completely pain-free 7 days later. I didn't need to go to the physio, and I self-managed the pain 100% by myself, and I'm going to show you how. If you lock in, turn off notifications, and watch the full video, I guarantee you'll be able to self-manage your own pain in the context of minor aches, pulls, tweaks, and pops that occur in the gym without needing to seek professional help from a doctor or physio. So let's dive in. I really want to jump straight into practical application, but I think it's important to start with a quick overview of what pain is, what it isn't, and what demographics this guide is potentially best suited to. So pain is commonly thought of as your body's response to it being damaged, although this doesn't seem to be the case. Pain is more about the body perceiving threat and protecting itself from damage. So if you're experiencing pain, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done yourself harm. Even in cases of severe pain, there doesn't seem to be a strong association with the amount of active tissue damage. Now, a lot of people will make the claim that the pain they're experiencing is a direct result of poor technique or muscle imbalances, or maybe even just due to the dangerous nature of lifting weights in general. And none of this appears to be true. If it were true, people wouldn't experience pain while lifting with textbook technique, yet it happens all the time. Muscle imbalances as well aren't inherently dysfunctional. For example, high performance athletes carry muscle imbalances that they've just adapted to performing with. If you're stimulating in an imperfect, imbalanced state, you're going to adapt to deal with that in post demand. Now, my own experience with gym related pain has almost entirely been related to acute increases in volume or intensity while training in an overstimulated state or an under recovered state. Whereas maybe for you, pain might strike most at instances where work stress is high or your environment acutely changes. And so reflecting on the context within which you experience pain is really important to pay attention to, as there's going to be a complex variety of biopsychosocial or biological, psychological, and social factors at play that are going to impact your behavior. More generally speaking, acute spikes in training load or training in a highly fatigued state are ones that you really want to watch out for. For instance, if I'm leading a pitch session with some rugby players who are just returning from their off season and I tell them to perform some all out sprints, the chances are at least a handful will end up pulling their hamstring as their training load has acutely spiked from possibly no running to a max effort run. And that actually happened quite a while ago, so I know it to be a relevant example. Now, because alliteration often makes things a bit easier to remember, I'm going to call this framework the 5 R's of pain management: refrain, reframe, reach, raise, and reassess. Kind of similar to dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. That's kind of the idea behind it. And I think it's optimally suited for 4 key audiences. So firstly, bodybuilders, weightlifters, powerlifters, and recreational gym goers. Secondly, people involved in sports where there's sudden bursts of activity without intense contact or high-speed collisions, for example, golf. Third, occupations where there's a sudden shift from being sedentary to highly active, such as a firefighter or a police officer. And last, occupations where sleep cycles are often irregular and activity states can quickly change, for example, a nighttime factory worker or a truck driver. All right, so you're working out, things are going well, but all of a sudden something gives and there's instant or delayed stiffness and pain. So where do you begin? Before addressing the physical, it's really important to address the psychological, i.e., your thoughts. What language are you using to describe the pain in your head and to others? Is there a lot of negative self-talk? Are you playing the victim card? Or maybe more simply, what are you thinking about and how are you behaving? And this is not to be overlooked. If you've ever had a bad attitude towards something or someone, has the outcome ever been positive? Possibly, but the odds aren't going to be in your favor. Now, it's almost inevitable that you'll start to catastrophize or view the situation as much worse than it actually is. Why me? I was doing so well. I think I've done permanent damage. I've definitely slipped a disc. Why do bad things always happen to me? So statements like this will likely surface in your thoughts. They're not helpful, but being aware of them is useful as you'll be able to recognize if you're sabotaging your own recovery, even though it might feel like the end of the world in those initial 2 to 3 days, and there will be a lot of stiffness and pain. You're probably fine. There's realistically only so much damage you can do in a controlled setting like a gym outside of freak accidents. And for the most part, most injuries sustained in the gym resolve of their own accord within a couple of weeks anyway, so reassuring yourself is key. Less catastrophizing means less fear, more self-efficacy, more movement, less disuse, and this results in a quicker recovery. You're not broken, you're just in some short-term discomfort. In fact, your pain could be a good thing, which brings us on to step two. Once you reassure yourself that you're not made of glass and that you're going to be fine, you then want to reframe your pain. And basically, by this, I mean try your best to flip the scenario into a positive and treat the experience as a challenge. What can you learn from what you're going through? What can you focus on that will allow you to continue making progress? And how can you come out the other end wiser and a more thoughtful practitioner? It's obviously easier said than done, but the sooner you start to reframe, the faster you'll start to accumulate small wins and return to normality eventually. I always find that my appreciation for feeling normal is acutely spiked after 7 to 14 days of pain. So there's possibly that to look forward to. And it's also just the perfect opportunity to get busy with other non-exercise related tasks. So once you've psychologically bought in by reassuring yourself and reframing your pain, you now want to find an entry point to return to training. What you absolutely don't want to do is avoid activity altogether and solely focus on rest. When you do this, you're essentially putting yourself at risk of some of the adaptations from training decaying that you've already worked so hard to achieve. 1 to 2 weeks, or however long the pain lasts, may not be that significant in your specific context. Although, from my experience of working with the public and just from my own training, structured exercise is often the foundation of someone's lifestyle. I think the idea that bad decisions don't come in threes could be somewhat relevant here, where you only focus on rest. Therefore, your day to day routine is missing the key element of training, which many times sets the foundation, and then maybe that feeds into some irregular net negative behaviors downstream. You're also going to lose work capacity and tolerance to your prior training loads if you focus solely on rest, which can be a bit of a problem for when you eventually jump back into training and you can no longer handle your pre-pain workloads. So rest is important, just not in isolation. For actually finding your entry point, you want to train in a way that leads to your symptoms improving or at the very least remaining stable during the session and in the 48 hours after the session. And this is totally open to you and how you're experiencing pain. I'm just going to now walk through a very typical way of going about this. So firstly, you keep your training constant and just adjust for weight on the bar. So if, for example, barbell Romanian deadlifts are causing painful symptoms with your lower back with 90 kilograms in the bar, but not 40 kilograms, that's your entry. And with this, adjusting for higher reps and maybe slower tempos will likely come into play as well. Secondly, you adjust for range of motion. If hinging through a full range of motion with just a barbell is causing pain, then the next course of action is to adjust for range. Is there a range of motion that you can move through that's comfortable? So for example, rather than hinging the barbell down towards the middle of the shins, maybe you only hinge over to the top of your kneecaps. The top of the range might be totally fine, whereas the bottom might be where the true irritation lies. In practice, you'll often adjust both weight on the bar and range of motion, so that's one that you're going to have to experiment with. This is also just a nice example of my trainee Paula applying this in one of her sessions. She was experiencing pain in her knee during the leg press, therefore she dropped the weight and adjusted the range of motion and was able to perform all the sets comfortably after doing so. And third, you adjust for exercise. If you've adjusted both weight on the bar and range of motion and there's still painful symptoms, then the final step will be to select for a completely different exercise altogether that's still specific to the movement you were training. For example, if I'm just not able to tolerate the barbell Romanian deadlift, maybe I experiment with dumbbell RDLs or Smith machine RDLs, basically whatever exercise I can tolerate that still has fairly high specificity. Now in my scenario, even holding weight was causing intense pain to shoot down my lower back, so I actually completely regressed my RDLs to bodyweight hinging without any weight, and you definitely shouldn't be afraid to do that as well. The goal is finding an entry, not putting yourself through hell trying to return to weights, ranges, and exercises that you're not yet ready to revisit. Okay, so outside of training, you're likely going to be moving in an irregular way, at least in the initial few days, and it's probably going to be painful to carry out normal day-to-day tasks. So if at all possible, I definitely recommend trying to sit, walk, and go about your day as normally as you can. Now, again, this is easier said than done, but it means that you're less likely to irritate another part of your body that's potentially compensating for all the weird and out of the ordinary positions you're potentially going to be pulling. All right, so you've established the entry point. Now you simply just need to build momentum by accumulating small wins. And the most common way to go about this is just through adding weight to the bar every other session. Now, these small wins will not inherently be linear. For example, you could easily overdo how much weight you add in one of the initial sessions and actually cause an increase in pain expression. Or maybe you just overlooked the importance of some biopsychosocial factors that end up leading to the increase in pain. Now, similarly, if the pain isn't gradually reducing during and between sessions, then keeping the weight constant until pain sensitivity decreases is a really good shout. If you're also thinking that there shouldn't be any pain at all present when you're training, you're unfortunately a bit off. Just because you're in pain, especially in those first few sessions, doesn't necessarily mean you're causing yourself damage to the affected area or more damage to the affected area. Now, I'm obviously not saying to train through pain that's incredibly intense, but rather to manipulate variables like loading, volume, tempo, range of motion, and possibly exercise selection to make the training process more manageable for yourself. When you then start to accumulate a lot of small wins and pain starts to decrease, you'll naturally build tolerance and work capacity, and normality will soon be restored. So you've reassured yourself, reframed the pain, found an entry point, built momentum, and a few weeks later, you're still in pain. What do you do then? In a lot of contexts, the previous steps will be more than enough. However, if there's still symptoms, then seeking out some professional help from a good sports physio, specifically one who trains thoughtfully and understands pain, is probably wise. I also think it's important to point out that even when you're super familiar with this framework, it can be quite tough to apply it without someone overseeing your progress. And I even found this myself in the initial 72 hours after hurting my back. Having someone objective in your corner, reassuring you and encouraging you to reframe the pain would be quite nice. Now, if you're someone who seems to be experiencing pain on a more frequent basis, then taking a bit of a step back and reassessing your overall programming and lifestyle is probably prudent as well. In a lot of contexts, manipulating programming variables like volume, intensity, and possibly exercise selection will likely go a long way to help circumvent these aches and pains resurfacing as often. For example, if I'm doing 3x8 on back squats and every set every week is an RPE 9 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 effort, something's eventually going to give. So, reassessing the overall training plan is important and something that may also require some external help as well. Now, something also worth mentioning is that I really don't want this video to appear dismissive of physios for the possible role they can play in helping people with managing their pain. This framework is more just a nod that you don't need to see a physiotherapist for managing the vast majority of aches and pains sustained in the gym. I could definitely see how this could be quite triggering, as physios and pain resolution tend to be closely linked in the wider public's consciousness. At least over here in Ireland, it is. Will you heal faster self managing your pain versus managing pain under the guidance of a private sports physio? I don't know. To maybe just reiterate what I said earlier, most non specific aches and pains sustained in the gym heal of their own accord within 1 to 2 weeks, with the exception of things like chronic tendinopathies, for example. So, at the very least, this framework will just allow you to keep training while helping you view the pain through a more positive lens. So, I really hope this information comes across as empowering. If you want and need to manage pain from training by yourself without spending money and wasting time, you often can. Lastly, I just want to give a quick shout out to the team over at Barbell Medicine for all their excellent free resources on pain, as they've heavily influenced my practice over the years. So, by all means, go and check their work out. If you find this video useful, I think you might enjoy this one as well. And if you want to work with me one-to-one, just tap the first link in the description. I'll see you in the next one.